Hello, everyone, and welcome to this CGHE webinar, which is the second in the series on artificial intelligence in higher education. This is an exciting and timely series which covers 6 webinars with excellent speakers on various aspects of AI in the sector. My name is Janja Komljenovic. I'm based at Lancaster University. And today we will be hearing from Michalinos Zembylas on decolonial approaches to artificial intelligence in higher education teaching and learning. Michalinos is a professor of educational theory and curriculum studies at the Open University of Cyprus, as well as an honorary professor at Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. But before I hand over to Michalinos, there are some brief housekeeping points to mention. So this webinar is being recorded and will be posted online on the CGHE website as soon as possible in a few days. A transcript of the chat function conversation will also be posted. Please keep yourself muted unless you have been asked to speak or ask a question. There's no need to have your video on during the webinar, but after Michalinos finishes with his talk, you can switch on your video, or if you're invited to ask a question, please do switch it on if you can. We recommend using the speaker view so you can more clearly see who is talking. So to ask a question, use please the chat function and write out the question you wish to ask. So at the end of the presentation, I will select the questions, notify, and call you out and notify when you are invited to ask your question directly. So when invited to ask a question, please unmute yourself, switch on your video, and state your name and where you're from. Okay, so please feel free to ask questions during the talk, and I will now pass on the floor to Michalinos. Welcome.
Thank you, Janja. I'm delighted to be here. Let me upload this. Okay, you should be able to see this now. Well, again, thank you for inviting me to talk about this, this topic, especially with the recent hype with Chat GPT. This topic is right has reiterated what we have known for some time now, namely that digital technologies and algorithms in particular have changed not only local and global society, but also how we understand oppression and social inequity. Seminal writings such as Safiya Umoya Noble's book, Algorithms of Oppression, How Search Engines Reinforce Racism, show how digital decisions of algorithms in online search engines serve to reinforce oppressive social relationships and enact new modes of racial profiling. Similarly, Ruha Benjamin's book, Race After Technology, Abolitionist Tools for the New Jim Code, on how digital technologies reinforce white supremacy and deepen social inequity, highlight that computing and ICT are increasingly scrutinized for the racialization of artificial intelligence and the colonial features in algorithmic decision-making. According to Achille Bembe, the arrival, proliferation, and ubiquity of digital technologies mark the latest phase of modernity in the arrangement of race and blackness in global society. Digital technologies function in ways that perpetuate the racial and colonial formations of the past. Now, literature on decolonization of higher education, and I give you some references there, over the last few years, has begun to identify some of the mechanisms through which universities reproduce ideas of Eurocentric epistemologies and function in neocolonial ways. This literature emphasizes that if universities are serious about decolonizing higher education, they need to dismantle the mechanisms that perpetuate the racial and colonial formations of the past, from the systems of access and management in universities, the systems of authoritative control, standardization, clarification, classification, commodification, accountancy, and bureaucratization reflected in the organizational structures, the teaching methods and assessment mechanisms of students and faculty alike, the research practices and publishing norms, the curricular content and design of courses, to the digital technologies that they use. And this is from Achille Mbembe. In particular, scholars have identified various manifestations of algorithmic coloniality, as has been called by Shakir Mohammed and his colleagues, in higher education teaching and learning practices, such as the use of online platforms that are rooted in Western-centric epistemologies, ontologies, and values, the racializing forces of AI technologies that are integrated into many aspects of teaching and learning, such as writing instruction and assessment, and the use of global university rankings that are driven by algorithms which are embedded in a colonial, neoliberal, and Western-centric imaginary of higher education. The aim of my talk today, then, is to confront algorithmic coloniality and neocolonialism in AI in order to explore the ethical and pedagogical implications for higher education teaching and learning. The questions driving this inquiry are the following. What does a decolonial approach to AI imply for higher education teaching and learning? How can educators, researchers, and students interrogate the coloniality of AI in higher education? And which strategies can be useful for undoing the ethics of digital neocolonialism in higher education? I argue that there is a political and pragmatic need to reflect critically on these questions and develop a decolonial conceptual framework for ethical AI in higher education teaching and learning. Given the complicity of modern higher education institutions in reproducing colonial frames of knowledge and ethics, it is important to generate new conceptual vocabularies as well as carefully considered strategies and practices for decolonizing the racializing and colonial forces of AI in the context of higher education. Now, to accomplish this task, my talk is divided into three parts. In the first part, I offer an overview of the reproduction of the racializing and colonial logic of AI in conjunction with approaches of decolonizing higher education. In the next part of my talk, I focus on AI ethics and its implications, especially in relation to assumptions about a universal Western-centric ethics that reproduces coloniality and racialization both within and beyond higher education. And in the final part, I propose a teaching/learning and research agenda at the intersection of three interrelated strategies that consider the entanglement between technical and social aspects of AI for the development of a decolonial ethical framework for AI in higher education. First of all, I think I should begin by defining how I understand coloniality, and I use Maldonado Torres' classic definition that coloniality is different from colonialism. Colonialism is a political and economic relation in which the sovereignty of the nation or the people rests on power of another nation, which makes such nation an empire. Coloniality instead refers to long-standing patterns of power that emerge as a result of colonialism. In this sense, then, coloniality is understood as an enduring process of established patterns of power between colonizer and colonized, what Aníbal Quijano refers to as the coloniality of power, that not only shapes our understandings of culture, labor, intersubjective relations, land, and knowledge production, but also reproduces hierarchies of race, gender, and geopolitics, which are used as tools of colonial control and expansion. An idea that gains in increasing attention in recent years is that digital spaces form digital territories that, like physical spaces, have the propensity to become sites of extraction and exploitation, and therefore sites of digital territorial coloniality. The new quote-unquote sites of coloniality, according to this idea, are now algorithmic decision systems and the use of big data to formulate national policies and international social development. In other words, digital territorial coloniality is another manifestation of the coloniality of power, albeit in digital structures, in the form of socio-cultural imaginations, knowledge systems, and ways of developing and using technology that are rooted in colonial epistemology, ontology, and ethics. For example, predictive policing and algorithmic sentencing, facial recognition, the use of digital technologies for discriminatory resource allocation, surveillance technologies, and racialized hiring through software engineering practices are only some of the instances that manifest the racializing and colonial logic of AI. In this sense, digital neocolonialism is understood, and I quote Adam here, the use of information technology and the internet by hegemonic powers as a means of indirect control or influence over a marginalized group or country, end of quote. Therefore, digital neocolonialism is a form of economic, social, or cultural hegemony that uses digital technologies to control people and communities. A major manifestation of digital neocolonialism is now called data colonialism, which denotes the appropriation of data as a material resource for economic profit. Some scholars argue that the practice of data colonialism shapes user interactions and corporate power in online space, therefore transforming our lives into the inputs of capitalism under the pretense of connection and personalization. It is also suggested that data colonialism reinforces existing inequalities and injustices in the world. For example, through the use of biometric databases to control migrants and refugees rather than solving a humanitarian crisis. Other scholars have suggested the term algorithmic coloniality to build upon theories of data colonialism and emphasize the ways in which algorithms are used to perpetuate coloniality, or as Mohammed and his colleagues explain, and I quote, to examine how coloniality features in algorithmic decision-making systems as they generate new labor markets, impact geopolitical power dynamics, and influence ethics discourse, end of quote. In this sense, algorithmic oppression is the latest manifestation of colonial oppression along a continuum of social injustice, exploitation, and dispossession that has been consistently reproduced through various means since the era of classic colonialism. In other words, to understand the harms caused by algorithmic coloniality, our analysis has to be situated in the histories of colonization and racialization, as well as the cultures of white supremacy and capitalist exploitation. Only by viewing these different forms of coloniality as entangled, it is possible to understand the historical continuity of social injustices in different sites. A decolonial framework of AI or decolonial computing, in the words of Syed Mustafa Ali, synthesizes theoretical perspectives that foreground issues of algorithmic coloniality and oppression in order to expose and dismantle contemporary colonial structures manifested in digital technologies. According to Ali, decolonial computing attempts to engage with the phenomenon of computing from a perspective informed by, even if not situated at, the margins or periphery of the modern world system, wherein issues of body politics and geopolitics are analytically foregrounded. Put differently, decolonial computing as a critical project is about interrogating who is doing computing, where they're doing it, and thereby what computing means, both epistemologically, that is in relation to knowing, and ontologically, that is in relation to being. Decolonizing AI, then, is a process of breaking down the systems of oppression that arose with colonialism and have led to present injustices that AI threatens to perpetuate and exacerbate. Here is precisely the crucial role of higher education, namely to make a contribution towards challenging algorithmic coloniality and colonial AI ethics in the context of higher education, teaching and learning, and nurturing what Enrique Dussel and Nelson Maldonado Torres call a decolonial ethics. Decolonial critiques in higher education highlight the importance of resisting colonizing moves that are driven by dominant European epistemological, ontological, and ethical investments in universality, supremacy, and mastery that have made modern universities colonial institutions in their practices and their structures. But what would a decolonial ethics of AI in higher education really mean in practice? Timnit Gebru has become one of the most well-known advocates for diversity in technologies. He used to be a senior research scientist in Google, co-leading the ethical artificial intelligence team, but her employment ended in December of 2020 under circumstances that are disputed. Her departure from Google has received considerable coverage in the media, highlighting some of the issues discussed here, such as data colonialism and the importance of understanding the historical and political factors that disadvantage certain groups who are subjected to automated decision tools. Gebru has pointed out that ethics has become the language du jour in the AI field, yet many times it is simply a buzzword that fails to pay attention to the serious ethical and socio-political consequences of AI in people's lives. From massive face recognition-based surveillance and machine learning-based decision systems predicting crime recidivism rates to the move towards automated health diagnostic systems, argues Gebru, the rapid permeation of AI into society has not been accompanied by a thorough investigation of the harm caused to certain groups of people, such as women and minorities. Although big tech companies have financed projects that claim to use datafication for social good, quote unquote, as part of, again, quote unquote, AI for social good initiatives, such as the use of AI applications in humanitarian settings, satellite imagery, data visualizations, chatbots, and biometrics, the claim of AI for social good is rooted in mythology and colonial legacies. The term AI for social good is deeply contested because what is good for one group may not be good for others. As computation mirrors the values of its coders, processes of automation that are supposedly designed and used for social good, in reality exacerbate inequalities as well as race and gender discrimination. Therefore, a decolonial approach to AI for social good does not only reveal the power asymmetries underpinning AI for social good initiatives, but also highlights the colonial ethics and rationality that has always been embedded in the measurement and classification systems of the empire in order to control colonial subjects. For example, the present model of biometrics that is used in AI was initially introduced in British colonies to control colonial subjects. This model classifies people in terms of biological and later genetic determination, as well as the determination of market forces. Such practices remind us, according to Achille Mbembe, that morality has been historically used to rationalize colonial practices, so it is crucial that the moral discourses underpinning AI for social good are not taken at face value. In general, a decolonial ethics aims to undo the ethics of coloniality and Eurocentrism within various domains of social and political life. For example, AI ethics is rooted in a set of assumptions that there is a universality of ethical concerns that can be objectively measured and addressed. However, as Rachel Adams argues, these assumptions are deeply problematic, not only because they assume universality is unfounded, but also because it is grounded in Western-centric ethical values that assimilate the ethics of other communities. So a decolonial ethics of AI emphasizes the limitations and coloniality of universal ethics, exposes the dominant rather than inclusive ethical frameworks, and seeks alternatives in pluralism and pluriversal ethics. A consideration of some examples of current ethical problems with how AI is used in higher education, teaching, and learning will show more clearly what a decolonial ethics of AI would entail in practice. For instance, some scholars argue that global university rankings are very much embedded and sustained within a broader colonial, neoliberal, and Western-centric imaginary of higher education. So Western-centric values about what is deemed possible and desirable within modern institutions drive AI and algorithmic biases. As Ezekiel Dixon Roman also emphasizes, the racializing forces of AI technologies are integrated into many aspects of teaching and learning, such as writing instruction and assessment. There are machine learning platforms, for example, that provide feedback on student writing based on standards-aligned rubrics and training data that are embedded in racializing processes. So unless the socio-technical systems are reconceptualized and redesigned to further the aims of educational equity, for example, by decoupling the technology platforms from standards and rubrics that are racializing and neoliberal, it will not be possible to realize the decolonial potential of AI in education. I would argue then that there are inherent problems in AI technologies in education that unless they are tackled in their roots, some of the current ethical problems with how AI is used in higher education, teaching and learning will simply be reproduced. For these reasons, there are questions around who, which body or organization should take responsibility for regulating AI in education, particularly since AI impacts not only data protection and privacy, but also on learners' fundamental rights in general. Also, there are numerous concerns about digital structural violence in AI technologies in education and the negative role it could have in future learning systems. For example, as a result of the exclusion of marginalized learners in the design of learning systems. As suggested by some, and I give here the example of the Institute for Ethical AI in Education at the University of Buckingham. This is from 2021, if I'm not mistaken. There has to be an ethical framework for AI in education that entails specific objectives and criteria, such as AI should be used to achieve well-defined educational goals based on strong societal, educational, or scientific evidence that this is for the benefit of the learner. AI systems should be used in ways that promote equity between different groups of learners and not in ways that discriminate against any group of learners and so on. I mean, this criteria couldn't be more timely at this moment in history with all the hype about ChatGPT and its tremendous ethical, political, and pedagogical implications. However, it is crucial to emphasize that the main problem is not only how AI is used, but also how it is inherently designed, which is currently problematic because it entails neocolonial thinking. Unless an ethical framework for AI in education is designed and implemented in ways that provide a decolonial orientation to AI, then I'm afraid that what we could call a soft engagement with decolonial ethics will not be sufficient. Engaging in a decolonial ethics of AI would essentially amount to working towards dismantling the colonial and racializing forces of AI technologies in education and rebuilding new technologies that are decolonized. The role of universities is crucial in this direction by creating learning spaces that not only identify the harms caused by algorithmic decision-making and the systemic issues of racism and colonialism in the use of digital technologies, but also enable full participation, contribution, and equitable control of the development process of new digital technologies. Now, in the final part of my talk, I want to discuss a few decolonial strategies as tools, if you will, of practice that can help educators, researchers, and students in the context of higher education, teaching, and learning. And I refer to AI lecturers, education and computer science faculties and heads of faculties, private companies that develop AI software for education, to reimagine the development and use of digital technologies in ways that critique and reframe its ethics while anticipating and averting algorithmic coloniality and harm. Needless to say, this is a monumental task that has to take a holistic and multifaceted approach. Namely, it has to take place both at the technical level, design and development of digital technologies, and the social level, the use of digital technologies. Focusing only on one level while ignoring the other will not take us very far. As Ruha Benjamin argues, reimagining alternative digital futures entails considering the entanglement between technical and social aspects by rethinking both the development and use of technology based on different ethical values than the ones dominating today. In particular, for the development of a decolonial ethical framework for AI in higher education, I propose a teaching, learning, and research agenda at the intersection of three interrelated but distinct strategies that consider the entanglement between technical and social aspects. These are the strategies that you see in the slides here, and I will discuss briefly each strategy and then I will end. The first decolonial strategy calls for a historicization of AI and digital technologies as affective, material, and political assemblages of coloniality and racism that highlight the need to redesign AI in terms of the colonial ethic. Now, what does this mean? This means understanding and examining algorithmic coloniality as not merely an ahistorical or transhistorical event, but rather a product of ongoing colonial practices. The properties of these practices are contextually contingent, the result of specific affective, material, and political processes of colonialism that need to be dismantled as part of decolonizing AI. At the technical level, for example, AI software development, this strategy implies infusing critical technical practices of AI with decoloniality. At the social level, for example, courses that are relevant to AI in education or other disciplines, this means systematic and systemic reflexive work of critiquing algorithmic coloniality to uncover hidden assumptions about coloniality and racism as those are manifested in the design and use of digital technologies. The second decolonial strategy suggests inventing practices of ethical solidarity towards those who suffer the negative impacts of AI. This strategy is attentive to the dire consequences of AI technologies and emphasizes the need to mobilize collective struggles by both developers of AI software for education and its users against the unethical design and use of such technologies. An example of such an effort in higher education is the interdisciplinary research center named CyCat, Cyprus Center of Algorithmic Transparency, that we established a few years ago at my university in Cyprus with some colleagues from the sciences. Its mission is to promote algorithmic transparency at all levels of education, not only in Cyprus, but also in Europe. So far, we offered numerous workshops to teachers and students and the general public to raise awareness about the value of algorithmic transparency and AI. And finally, the third decolonial strategy and practice, which is essentially an extension of the second, is about creating renewed affective and political communities that cultivate decolonial ethics in the development and use of AI, building critical practices in the development and use of digital technologies depends on creating strong affective and political communities across disciplines and communities that prepare the ground for contesting, redressing, and reversing algorithmic coloniality, creating new forms of such communities that elevate intercultural dialogue and demonstrate the forms of solidarity and alternative community that are possible, demands the recovery of principles of living that are incompatible with colonial norms of epistemology, ontology, and ethics, decolonizing the deeply affective sensibilities of algorithmic coloniality that are currently embedded in many ethical practices around the design and use of AI in higher education is a crucial strategy and practice for cultivating alternative relational practices that work against colonization. To conclude now, I have suggested that a decolonial approach to AI in higher education, teaching and learning is an invocation to challenge the ethics of algorithmic coloniality that continues to produce digital technologies that exclude, delimit, and degrade other ways of knowing, living, and being that are not rooted in Eurocentric thinking. Higher education, teaching, and learning can make an important contribution by developing strategies and practices that expose and critique the development and use of AI technologies in colonial terms, while also providing a decolonial vision and praxis. While my speculative inquiry and tentative proposal on a decolonial ethics of AI in higher education has yielded some insights, many more tasks need to be undertaken by educators, students, and researchers in the future to create spaces in which the coloniality of AI is not only critically questioned, but also alternative solutions are provided to the current ethical problems with how AI is developed and used in higher education. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Michalinos, for this really wonderful and excellent talk. So we do have some questions coming. So first I will give the floor to, I hope I pronounced this correctly, Kyria Finardi.
Yes, you did. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Michalinos, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right too. Thank you very much for your talk. It was very enlightening and very interesting. To keep it short, though you mentioned some examples of the strategies, the three strategies for decolonizing AI, I was wondering if you could provide or elaborate a little bit more on those examples, because this is very inspiring for us all. And just a final comment before you answer the question. Since the colonial approaches is about identifying, interrogating, and maybe interrupting colonial practices. And as you said, since we are thinking of thinking of alternative ways of knowing and being, how can we do this in other languages and in knowledges produced in other languages, considering that AI is heavily indebted to and produced in English? So those are just provocations, discussions. Again, thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you, Kyria. These are excellent questions, and I don't know the answer to the second question. This is I'm struggling with it as a Greek speaker. My main language is Greek, and I have to communicate in English. We all know the challenges, especially in teaching and learning. But I do think that we need to invest the time to pay attention to local languages, and there is a tendency now to pay more respect to local languages and use local languages. And I think we have to do it. It's our responsibility. That doesn't mean we should, make English or any other international language for that reason as, a bad language. I mean, obviously, all languages are wealth. It's humanity's wealth. The problem is when some knowledges, including languages, become, the dominant and replace other ways of knowledge. And this is what is the problem that we need to tackle. Now, to go back to the first question about the different strategies, I think the main argument that I try to make is that we need both to pay attention to the social and the technical aspects of algorithmic coloniality. I mean, I'm not a technical person, but I work with people in the sciences, and we try to work together and understand each other. So this is why I emphasize many times throughout the talk that one without the other is not going to succeed. We need both. My expertise is in education, in decolonization. So what I can bring to the table is these sensitivities or, examples from algorithmic coloniality, the use of AI databases or colonial databases in ways that discriminate. The biases that are embedded in algorithms. I mean, this is the classic example, gender and race biases. So there needs to be first sensitivity to understand the problem, and then sit down together with techie people and see how can we redesign this. And I make no mistake, as I said, this is a monumental task. mean, we understand, we realize that there are problems, and the problems will not be fixed in soft approaches. We need, more radical approaches. And obviously, each one of us, in teaching and learning and in the sciences have our own responsibility. But unless we work together, I'm afraid there won't be, the changes that we are talking about. So it's not enough for me to give you another example. It's not enough for me to give a course on AI to sensitize the public or my student teachers about algorithmic coloniality. That's the least I can do. There are many more levels. And the examples that Achille Bembe gave, basically about redesigning the whole university, the whole higher education system, includes everything from our assessment methods to our, administration, to the evaluation, everything. So it's not like one single thing, but many things at many levels. That's why it's such a complex task. I hope that I answered to your question.
You did. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Thank you both. So now we have quite a few people on the list. I'm confident that we can go through with all the questions that you have so far, but please keep on posting and we'll see how we get on. So next one is Alfred. Alfred, are you here? Are you okay to ask your question? Alfred Adubobi.
Yeah, hello. Yes, my question is, looking at the proliferation of neoliberal policies in education, why the emphasis on higher stakes academic achievement but reducing costs? How does this help to incorporate the use of AI to benefit marginalized communities in education?
I couldn't hear very clearly the question. I'm sorry. Can you repeat?
Okay. So my question is, we are looking at the proliferation of neoliberal policies in education now, neoliberalism in education, and the emphasis is on reducing cost, making profit, or running education as a form of business. So with this understanding, I know the proliferation of AI is to make certain people rich. So how do you look at this so that it will also benefit the marginalized communities in education?
That's a very good question, Alfred. Thank you. Thank you very much. You're absolutely right that, there is a proliferation of neoliberal policies in higher education, and this is entangled with algorithmic coloniality. Now, how do you break this, this system? I guess it's the million-dollar question of how you struggle, as I mentioned earlier, at various levels to benefit, marginalized populations. Basically, from the level of design of AI technologies to the use of AI technologies, we basically need to change our paradigm, our epistemological, ethical, ontological paradigm. We realize that the paradigm we have now is problematic for many reasons, including the harms caused on marginalized populations. So the question is, are we willing to change that? Who is willing to do that? Who is benefiting from the system as it is now? So it's a complex question in the sense that obviously we have to deal with fundamental questions of white supremacy, coloniality, who is benefiting from this system, and the unwillingness to challenge this So unless there is solidarity among different groups in different domains, social and technical, we're not going to make many changes. So the universities, many universities around the world follow this neoliberal model because there is benefit. The question is, how can they be convinced that this is an unethical system that has dire consequences on many populations, unless the universities and individuals at the institutional and individual level, we realize and we are convinced that this needs to be changed, everything else will be theoretical talk. So somebody can easily, critique my talk of being theoretical stuff. And partly it's right in the sense that, my goal is to convince, people in many domains that we need to rethink and redesign this system, because it's not only harmful for marginalized populations, it's harmful for everyone, including whites, including dominant groups. So unless we realize this, I'm afraid that the changes that will be instigating in universities will be soft changes rather than more radical changes. I hope I answered to your question.
Yes, perfectly answered. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. So I will now read out two connected questions because they are connected, and I think it's best just to follow one after another, Michalinos, and then you decide how you want to answer that. So Rachel asks, well, she said that she read an article regarding the lack of diversity in AI development and policy creation. So her question is, how can higher education work with industry to encourage such diversity? And how are they working together now, especially with regards to the edtech industry? And then following this was Moira, who shared a link to an article that was just published, and it's about the Time 100 most influential people in AI. So I clicked on that link, and then the sort of cover of this shows people of different genders and colors and so on. So Moira's question is, article like this one gives a surface veneer of diversity in AI. So how do you respond to these optics versus deep coloniality?
Okay, the first question, is it in the chat?
Yes,
I'm trying to find it.
It's quite high up. It's by Rachel Moody.
Okay, yeah. How can higher education work with industry? I think we need to, the example that I gave from the center in Cyprus, the CICAT center, is actually a response to this need, the need that higher educators, researchers need to go out in the industry and identify people and organizations to work with. I don't think, I mean, that I think is our responsibility in higher education. I don't think we need to wait for software developers to come to us. They do have their own processes and their own ethical procedures. I think we need to take the initiative and go out and find different organizations and create, procedures. And eventually, there are different efforts. I mean, if you look now in Europe, there are different ways of reformulating processes of ethical AI, especially after all the hype with Chat GPT and how to use it. It has come a little bit too late, but maybe not extremely too late, because some of these questions and the realizations, we should have tackled them many years ago, and several scholars and others have warned that the ethical procedures of AI needed to be reviewed many years ago. But I think it's never too late. We as far as we are concerned, because the question is addressed to us, we need, as educators and researchers, to go out, get outside of our offices and take initiatives to work with people in the industry, work together, establish ethical procedures, and reimagine and redesign these technology tools and the procedures and the algorithms. There have to be more transparent procedures, and unless this is demanded by the public and eventually becomes also part of a legal process, part of a public demand, then I don't think there's going to be much progress. So this is my response to Rachel's questions. Now, about the Moira's question, I'm not familiar with this. It refers to the article regarding the lack of diversity. Well, let me try and respond to this, and Moira, please let me know if I'm along the lines you had in mind. So far, the efforts that we have undertaken are what some of the scholars call soft approaches. Soft approach is an approach that doesn't go too far. It's an approach that, for example, the example that I gave earlier about giving a course on AI, coloniality and decoloniality, or changing the curriculum, decolonizing the curriculum at the university, an even more broad example. This doesn't bring any structural changes. It works at the level of awareness and sensitivity, and the question is, so what? What change that it makes? It changes possibly some people's ideas, some individuals' ideas, makes them more sensitive, yes, but how do the structures of coloniality change? How do we target the structures of coloniality? We need more structural changes. And so, deep changes in coloniality require more structural and deep changes. So superficial changes that work at the level of awareness only, and awareness about the diversity of that we need to have in higher education and so on, they're not enough. So let me know if this is satisfying to you, Moira, and I can come back to it.
Great, thank you. So we have still 3 speakers and 6 minutes. Let's see if we manage all. We'll try one by one and see how we get on. First is Sheila. Sheila, are you okay to come in and ask your question? Okay, let me just find the question. Okay, so the question is, can the same issues be raised about many global language assessments sold worldwide? And the issue was around how AI is heavily based in English, and how can we think of other forms of knowing in other languages?
Yeah, I touched a little bit on this in the first question. And I think, yes, this is a necessity. I mean, we do need to develop and take advantage of other knowledges especially from the global South. If we want to talk about, decolonization, I'm afraid we cannot continue and use only one or two languages like we used to do in the past, as if nothing, has changed. So that's part of the structural changes that need to take place.
Okay. Next on the list is Victoria. Victoria, are you still here? Okay to come in?
Yeah, no, I'm here. I wanted to ask you, and it builds very much on what you've just said about languages, and that's what's your opinion on the use of digital humanities, what's your opinion on the use of digital humanities by Anglophone universities to extract information from non-Western institutions such as archives, museums, and then recommunicate that information in English only? And what happens then? As in, is that...
Can you give us an example of extraction, how you understand extraction in this context, Victoria?
So my understanding is for instance, not going necessarily to the archives, but just paying a non-Western archive to send you the information, and then in a digital humanities project, recommunicate it in English, for example, or just using the metadata of an institution, that could be a museum, for the purpose of building knowledge within an Anglophone university, which hence that means that the money is going to the university for doing this amazing research, but not to the non-Western institution necessarily.
Well, I do think from your description, there is an implication that there is something unethical and problematic here going on. I'm not very familiar really to have kind of, I need to get more information, but it sounds like one of the critiques in the literature on colonization and decolonization, that this extraction from the north to the south and is still going on in ways like what you describe, and there has to be more collaboration between the global south and the global north to dismantle these structures of the past. So taking advantage of the global south for the purposes that you describe without giving something back sounds to me that is problematic. Now, we shouldn't preclude the possibility of benefiting and creating spaces where these kinds of projects can be changing, can be challenging to the colonial structures of universities in the global north. But I think there have to be closer collaborations that are mutually beneficial and are not reproducing some of the same structures that we have critiquing here, and I'm sure that you critique as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think I will give the floor to Loveday Pollard for a very short comment. I'm not really sure it will demand an answer, Michalinos, but I think it's a very pertinent comment and might be a good way to end this webinar. So Loveday, if you want to come in. You're muted, you're muted.
Yes, thank you. I see we've arrived at our 4 o'clock, so I will be brief. Yes, I love languages. I'm an English speaker, but I live in France, and I've always loved French, and I've actually lived abroad quite a lot of my life. So I'm very sensitive to cultural issues and worldviews. I also lived 5 years in Morocco, which gave me an experience of being in a very different culture from my original one. And one of my concerns really is just that we don't get distracted by saying it's white dominance and Western mentality, which is the only issue, because I think the issue is wider than that. It is, you know, different cultures and different worldviews, and the fact that we are actually trying to communicate on a platform. So yes, I agree that that needs to be really looked into, but we certainly can't fix it quickly, because it takes a lot of effort to communicate, even, you know, in the same language, but with a different worldview. So, you know, that needs a lot of work. I totally agree with that. I think there's the other, then as educational people, we're kind of in the middle. I think, yes, I think, Michalinos, you're quite right that we should be taking initiative, and we have a really key role to play in influencing how AI is used in education, and therefore hopefully outside education, but it's really key. I would totally agree with that. And the third thing, I think, is this area where ethics needs to underpin the legal framework, which, you know, we really need to push for it, because the technology is developing so fast that the legal framework can't keep up with it, basically. So there is a kind of, you know, there is this tremendous area where ethics needs to be developed. So I think perhaps that's our biggest contribution as educationists, is that we can really push the ethical framework forward so that it is inclusive, and so that there is an understanding. We don't reject any particular culture, but, you know, we work towards having something that is favourable to, you know, multicultural use and still protects everybody, because it's a terrible invasion of privacy. And yes, I think we can all be, you know, dominated by AI, and whoever's got control of AI, you know, whether that's a Western university or a government in some country. So for me, it's a very, very big issue. And I kind of think we need to stand back from the 20th, 21st century and see, you know, it's a deeper issue. Mankind has always wanted to dominate. So whichever group has got the control economically, socially, politically, you know, we'll always try to dominate the other. And we've got a fight on our hands to kind of, you know, make it a bit more of an even.
We have to stop. We're not time. So sorry about this rude interruption.
Oh, no.
Yeah. But
sorry. I hope my message was clear. It was a bit complicated. Yeah, but thank you for doing this. Anyway, it's very interesting.
Thank you so much for many good points. Any last sentences, Michalinos? Would you still like to come in? You're good. Okay.
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your talk, Michalinos, and for everyone for engaging with your questions and comments, and Michalinos to engage with us all. As mentioned, this was the second in the webinar series on AI in higher education out of the 6. So we still have 4 webinars in the coming 2 weeks. So next week on Tuesday, we will hear from Carlo Perrotta, who's based in Australia, and he will unpack how the AI actually functions in education. So this will be a fabulous session on the nitty-gritty bits of that. And then on Thursday, Michael Webb from JISC UK will talk about what JISC as a sector body does to support universities. So do come if you can. If not, please watch the recordings. As Farhan posted with the CG account here, the link to the website where the recordings will be published, as well as our YouTube channel. Thank you so much. I wish you a good rest of the day, and hopefully see as many of you as possible next week. Thank you, Michalinos. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Yenya. Thank you. Thank you all.